America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, and today we're joined by Tom Sullivan. He is the vice president of small business policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Elaine. It's great to be here.
Well, I think that we both speak the same language when it comes to small business and what they need and what helps them grow and thrive. It really is a unique set of folks. They're entrepreneurial. They are generally optimistic, even in the hardest of times, is what I found, like during COVID and when we had 9% inflation and high energy costs and things like that. We just generally find that they are very optimistic. And my family used to own a Goodyear tire store. So I come from small business. I also worked in corporate America, full disclosure, I worked for the big bad guys too. But we had about 10 employees, so I understand what it's like to meet a payroll. I understand what it's like to have local ordinances like really ruin your day when you suddenly learn that, oh, you didn't pay this tax, or there's this weird local ordinance that, whatever it is that, was so disappointing to find out there was another fee. It's just, you feel like it's kind of death by a thousand cuts. And yet you still feel optimistic every time that customer came in and ordered a new set of tires, or you got a new piece of equipment that was going to make things easier for your employees. And it was always neat to hire an employee and talk about our benefits and have their eyes kind of light up, because it was like, oh, you have health insurance. Oh, you pay 100% of it? Yes, because I believe in taking care of my employees. So, I love that about people. I love that about entrepreneurs. You lead the Small Business Council at the U.S. Chamber. Tell us what you do over there.
Well, sure. Thanks, Elaine. And I couldn't agree with you more about the optimism on Main Street and just the fantastic nature of Main Street employers. When you look at the fabric of free enterprise in the United States, the idea that someone would give up a 40 or 50 hour work week to work 80 or 90 hours as a small business owner and jump at the chance to be their own boss is really a nice snapshot into that optimism that free enterprise captures. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we represent about 3 million businesses of every size, and that includes the membership of about 1,600 local, state, and regional chambers of commerce. Most of them are small, just like the vast majority of businesses in the United States. I can't talk with 3 million businesses every day, and so we try to narrow down. I have about 100 small business owners who are our kitchen cabinet of small business policy. And I have learned over the years to check with small businesses who work outside of the Washington, D.C. Beltway before prioritizing policies like lower taxes, lower regulation, access to healthcare. Check with them before we go to Capitol Hill and talk with the Congress, before we go across the street to the White House and talk with President Trump's team. So they do serve as a sounding board as well as an advisory system. And they're just wonderful. It's every slice of small business. We've got high tech. We've got certainly low tech. Our alfalfa farmer from Buckeye, Arizona. We've got aerospace, manufacturing, services like PR, marketing, web usage. It really runs the gambit. We do focus primarily on employers, even though most small businesses in the United States, as you know, Elaine, actually don't even have employees. They're 80 over 80% of small businesses are not employers. And that's really the amazing part of the over 30 million small businesses in America. We do tend to focus on those that have employees because that's when federal policy really starts to impact, I would argue sometimes gets in the way of small businesses being successful.
Yeah, I love how you call them your kitchen cabinet, sort of your council of many. We do the same thing. We call them small business advocates, and we have, at any given time, because they kind of cycle in and cycle out based on their time, which is very, very limited. But when they have time for us, we call them our small business advocates. We work with them and media train them and help develop sort of their story, and so that we can amplify it, whether it's challenges that they're facing through government policy that might be hurting them, or in the case of the president's recent signature bill, the one big beautiful bill that was just recently passed. We try to get that story out there about what you would do with a tax cut, with the immediate depreciation, and how you would spend that money, so that we have real stories that the media is carrying to the American public. Because the bill's been so beat up in the media by folks who are claiming, oh, it's just tax cuts for the rich, at the expense of everybody else. And the reality is it's not. And I know there's some wonderful provisions in there that we've talked about here at Job Creators Network and on this podcast. But tell me what you're focused on some of those provisions, and kind of the highlights of what your members are telling you are just fantastic about the bill.
Well, thank you. So first of all, let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit. Okay, so 14 to 16 months ago, when we really started looking at what mattered most to small business owners, what we heard, and I know after talking with your team, Karen Harned and Alfredo Ortiz, it was very, very clear that small businesses were desperate for certainty. And there was this looming deadline of an expiration of several provisions that were passed in 2017 that would have resulted in a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase if Congress didn't take action. And so we absorbed all that information, and then it became very clear that our top priority had to be creating a tax code that kept those low rates and guaranteed permanency and predictability, so that small businesses could plan more than 2 weeks ahead. How wonderful would it be to plan 6 months ahead, a year ahead, and so forth. So that was our starting point. And then, Elaine, when you talked about small business advocates, I cannot overstate the importance of these wonderful men and women who volunteer their time to tell Congress what they know. And I'll just share one example because I referenced him already. Our alfalfa producer in Buckeye, Arizona, Dick Cardew, he was in a meeting with Congressman Schweikert from the Phoenix, Arizona area. And Dick said, look, I'm not an accountant. I'm not an expert in all of these tax complexities. All I know is that I've been saving up for 2 years to buy this machine that will help me load hay onto my truck, because he's getting older. I mean, he can't do it anymore. There aren't actually that many low-wage workers that are willing to do this really hard work. And so he's been saving for a machine. And he said, the tax rates that started in 2017 have allowed for me to put aside some money to buy this machine. And that's really what I need to do. But in order to do that, next year I've got to have that 20% deduction because he's the sole proprietor. And Congressman Schweikert and his staffers' eyes lit up like, oh my gosh, that's what we've been talking about. And this is the perfect example. And not only does Dick Cardew, who runs Barn 21 Hay, so if anyone's looking to buy hay that's tuned into this podcast, great alfalfa. you know, he is not only able to continue to save to buy this machinery, but he's going to buy it from his local distributor. And so it's this kind of ripple effect of low tax rates that not only help Dick as a small business owner, but help his community because he's going to be spending that money just down the street in an equipment supplier. So it's that type of advocacy that makes it work. Now, when the president signed this legislation on July 4th, I think you and I are now aggressively trying to communicate, well, what's in this legislation? And we've been really going on the road. We've met in about 55 congressional districts with small business owners talking about how they can use this tax bill to grow their business, give their employees raises, invest in their community. And we will get to 60 tax roundtables by Labor Day, and then we're set to have 100 by the end of the year. What we're really focused on is what's in it to help small business owners now. Not next year, not next February, March when you're starting to get your tax stuff ready, but like right now. And so there's a couple of things that are important to notice. So first of all, if a small business owner has never heard the acronym QBI, Qualified Business Income, they should probably call their tax advisor before listening to the rest of this podcast, because it's that 20% deduction available to sole proprietors, partnerships, S corps that really depends on what your qualified business income is. And 20% off the top is a big deal. That 20% deduction is now permanent. There are many small businesses that have been taking advantage of this since 2017. But honestly, Elaine, there are some that haven't because they just don't know. They hear these complex terms like 199 cap A or QBI, and their head starts spinning by all of this kind of tax language. And if a small business owner is not familiar with QBI, please call your tax advisor and see whether or not you're missing out, like cash on the table, to be able to have this 20% deduction. I think second to that, which is very important because this actually is applicable back to January 20th of this year, that is the increased expensing limit. So 179 expensing actually doubled under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That means that right now you have $2.5 million 179 expensing. That means equipment, furniture, software, computers, all that stuff you can invest in and have it deducted without tying up cash. And as Elaine, as you and I know, after representing so many wonderful small business owners, cash is king, not just because it looks nice and, you know, when you have a ton of cash on hand, but from a small business perspective, it's the idea that you can use that cash to give an employee a raise, or you can use that, you can use that cash to, you can
it's a
use
game
that
changer for small businesses to be able to deduct those investments. And I'm sure you have a million stories from business owners from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act who invested, made the decision because of a policy. This is what I love. It's a consequence of policy, right? The policy exists. They know about it, hence educating what you're doing right now. And then they make the decision based on the policy to invest in their business because they can deduct the full amount in the year they buy it instead of over a period of years. It's a game changer. And that's what I love about when you see good policy influence decisions, it's amazing. But when you see bad policy influence decisions, hence, I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to make that new hire. I'm not going to buy that new delivery truck. It's the same effect, just in the opposite direction. And that's why it's so important what you're doing with your tax roundtables and doing the educating and the talking about the bill. And the way you talk about it, fantastic. Because you're not talking about it way up here. You're talking about it to people who are pull up your bootstraps kind of people, men and women who started a business, but they're not tax and financial advisors.
You know, Elaine, one of the reasons I talk about tax policy as simply as I do is the only way I can understand it. I do know on your point about what is the wet blanket that prevents investment. And unfortunately, we saw on a research and development expensing front since 2022, that actually has been a problem. Since 2022, Congress reversed a 40-year practice that allowed for businesses to immediately expense research and development. And so you had to start amortizing. Well, I actually had no idea what that meant. So I learned from a small manufacturer in particular that amortizing means you have to spread that deduction over 5 years. And that translates into tying up cash.
Yeah.
Now, this One Big Beautiful Bill Act not only brings back immediate expensing, it does it retroactively. So if you're a small business owner with less than $31 million gross annual receipts, that's a mouthful, but I'll say it again. If you're a small business owner with less than 31 million annual gross receipts, you can amend your returns for 2022, 2023, 2024 if you've amortized to actually apply for a refund for that amortized capital to come back to you as cash. And that means the engineers, the innovation, all these things that are necessary to actually innovate and be ahead of the curve, that is expensable. The IRS, I mean, it's crazy to think like IRS is going to be giving refunds to small business so that they can free up cash and give raises, buy new equipment, hire people who are trained in AI, which is now, I think you're hearing the same thing. Mm-hmm. That's top on every resume coming into a small business right now. But that becomes more affordable when it's immediately expensable because you're not tying up cash. So that R&D immediate expensing, not only is it great that it's permanent, but the idea that you've been hamstrung for 3 years and amortized and you're able to amend those returns to get a refund, that is a game changer. And I know a lot of small businesses are talking with their tax advisors right now about how to do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's actually a provision I wasn't aware of. So thank you for that. So let me get this straight. If you are a small business owner and your gross receipts are under $31 million, you can go all the way back to 2022 and amend those, and you made investments in R&D, you can amend those tax returns so that you don't have to amortize them over the 5 years and take them in the year, which means technically you may be getting refunds.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And so I'm a lawyer by training, so I really have to give a little bit of a disclaimer here. Neither of us are tax advisors, yeah. But this possibility is amazing. And I'm hoping that a lot of your podcast listeners and viewers are going to ask their tax advisors about this. I have one small business manufacturer in Utah, actually, who told me that when she had to amortize starting in 2022, she ran the numbers, it equated to a 35% tax hike for her because the R&D expenses, and not many people know this, most of it are wages. Mm-hmm. They're the front lines of the folks who are innovating. I mean, sometimes we think of R&D and I think of like test tubes and robots and laboratories. Actually, it's from a small business perspective, it's not. It's people. Mm-hmm. It's mostly high wage earner technical positions that are pushing small businesses forward on the front edge of innovation. And if you can't immediately expense that, you fall behind, unfortunately, not only from larger business competitors, but quite frankly, other countries. I mean, the innovation pride of America is what keeps us competitive globally. And R&D expensing, without overstating it too much, but R&D expensing is a huge part of that.
It really is. We have a member in Pennsylvania. He's a manufacturer, employs about 200 people or so, and they're in Western Pennsylvania. So it's a small town. It's actually where the plane from 9/11 went down, where the memorial is just a few miles from there. But it's a small town. It's a rural area, and he's one of the large employers in his town. And so for him to have been able to grow his manufacturing plant, he was able to double the size of his lab, hire more people, give raises, give bonuses, and those are the types of things that help employers, but help the employees. And in his case, being kind of an anchor employer in his town, his concern, and this is an interesting perspective, his concern was that the youth in his town, they were leaving for jobs. And so what happens to a town when your youth leaves because there's no careers to stay? Your town dies. And so what he was looking at was really from a very, very big perspective of how do I help this town grow and thrive? And that's what he did. I mean, he invested in the town, he invested in his company. But what he said about the R&D was he's like 20% deduction, fantastic. R&D, immediate expensing, game changer. And so he has testified in Congress for us. He's brought his employees in to testify in Congress with him. He's been such a great advocate for this bill and for the big, beautiful bill. So those are some of the amazing provisions in the bill. What are you hearing from your small business owners now, your kitchen cabinet? Love that. As what they want to do now with their tax savings, with the certainty, and with the ability to invest?
Well, Elaine, I'll share with you something I just learned the other day, and perhaps this will be helpful for your small business advocate and champion out in Western Pennsylvania. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act also contains an opening up of what are called workforce Pell Grants. There's a manufacturer, and I was unaware of this, but they have been trying to convince government to open up Pell Grants, which are actually the largest educational grant system in the United States, open them up to technical schools for shorter term credentialing and certification programs. That actually starts July 1st, 2026. So opening up the Pell Grants to technical training, certification, and credentialing programs, that also is a game changer, especially in manufacturing. And you and I know that President Trump and his administration are really leaning into manufacturing. So it is no coincidence that is part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And we're excited about it. We've got to educate more and more manufacturers about this opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. There's no shortage of needing to get out there and push back on the narratives from the other side that are, really discrediting the benefits of this bill. And when you think about, even provisions that are going to everyday hardworking Americans, employees, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. We do a small business poll, and our small business owners across the country said that they really supported those provisions because they thought it would help them hire more, easier to find people. Because again, we have a labor shortage. We have more jobs than people available, right? What are you hearing in that area?
Well, I'm hearing consistent messages about frustration between how employees are characterized with the employer community. When you and I talk with these small business men and women, they say, like, who cares more about an employee? Me, who actually depends on them to actually make a product and service that answers a consumer demand, or some windowless office in Washington, D.C.? Mm-hmm. I will never, ever forget meeting with a marina owner up in Rhode Island and sitting down with him and asking, how it's going and all this stuff. And he started crying about having to ask the employees to contribute to the healthcare plan he provided. He had 20 employees, a grown man and a dock owner. So he's kind of a monster of a man working on the docks his whole life. And he had built this business to service boats in the Rhode Island area. And he was moved to tears. Not that he was taking away healthcare, but he had to ask his employees contribute to his healthcare plan. That one experience is always fresh in my mind when I hear about the values of employees to a small business owner. They are top on that list of who small business owners are fighting for. And so you're right. These provisions of no tax on tips, no tax on overtime are direct benefits for those employees. And it's no surprise to me, the most excited group are the small business owners who employ these men and women.
That's why I don't understand the argument that somehow these tax cuts are going to millionaires and billionaires. I don't see it. I mean, first of all, the rates of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for the last, since 2017 when it passed under the big beautiful bill, they're simply locked in. No change there. It gives small businesses, certainty with the 20% deduction, and it's permanent, and 100% immediate expensing, which we've talked about in depth. But the lower individual tax rates are simply locked in. So there's no new like fancy tax cut for our millionaires and billionaires, right? So that's not there. I mean, the real benefits are going to small business owners and hardworking Americans through I don't know a lot of millionaires and billionaires, but I don't know that a millionaire or a billionaire works on tips or overtime. So I don't see how they're going to benefit from that. So explain to me how these arguments are made, and how the media can just so dishonestly carry that message.
Well, it's unfortunate, but the mischaracterization of small business owners as millionaires is not new. But I'm always reminded by a wonderful gentleman from New England who is a spokesperson for the National Federation of Independent Business, who, Elaine, along with Job Creators Network and U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we all work together to try to make lower taxes permanent in one big beautiful bill act. And this NFIB member up in New England, he hangs sheetrock. Like, that's his business. He hangs sheetrock. And he comments that he was doing his taxes, getting all the material together for his taxes, looking over last year's taxes and this year's taxes. He said to his wife, he's like, "Hey, we're millionaires." Because on paper, the assets and inventory that he has of sheetrock and machinery, et cetera, forklifts and trucks, equate to well over $1 million. And so then he goes through very carefully what it means to be a millionaire. And at the end of this kind of 2-minute description, he and his wife are lucky to be scraping by to make a profit that he reinvests back into his company. And so that mischaracterization of what it means to have $1 million or several $1 million on a tax form is far different from the gentleman who's worked his whole life to build a sheetrock company that hangs sheetrock in construction in construction projects up in New England. So it's that mischaracterization that we've got to continually bring your advocates to Capitol Hill, our small business kitchen cabinet, and others to Washington, D.C. to explain to Congress, this is what it means to be a small business owner. And that the bumper sticker that criticizes lower tax rates might say we're all millionaires. We're not. We're hardworking folks that love to employ Americans. And here's what I mean by that. And the more education we can do, and quite frankly, the more members of Congress who have run a small business, the better off we are.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Sort of just broadly speaking, there's kind of two issues out there that are what I feel like and what I hear from our small business owners is there's the sort of the turmoil of the tariffs. I've got some small business owners that have said, yeah, I've seen increased costs, but I've made some changes here, or I've brought some parts inside internally, and we're going to start making them internally. or I see the reason for it. It's not that there's not turmoil there, but I've had a lot of small business owners tell me they understand the strategy, from a long-term perspective. Doesn't mean there's not going to be some turmoil for them. But then the other issue is the interest rates and not seeing the cut in interest rates because, we haven't seen the sort of the crazy inflation that was predicted, the gloom and doom. We've seen some increased costs in some areas. That's true, but we haven't seen overall inflation increase. And so I'm just curious, what's your perspective on what's the holdup? What is the holdup on cutting rates?
I think the response to a number of things that you outlined is something that I ask my colleagues a lot about, and that is why are we making it so hard? We've got a pro-business Congress, we've got a pro-business president, and sometimes, honestly, it just seems like we're just making it too hard. On the tariff issue, we do hear from small business owners who are struggling with the roller coaster because it prevents being able to plan. And I think the president is trying to make deals that provide that certainty. But in the meantime, that roller coaster can be crippling for small business owners. That I spoke with a coffee shop owner, Elisa Bobat James in Minnesota a couple weeks ago, and she's done pretty well. I mean, she's been in the business for about 10 years, so she's kind of gotten through the new coffee shop on every corner phenomenon. She's kind of survived through that. She just got her biggest grocery order from Kroger's just 3 weeks ago. That's the good news. The bad news is the order was for what they call Blondie Brazil. And on that same day that Alicia and I were talking, the president announced new tariffs on Brazil. And the challenge there from a roller coaster is she's got to lock in a price with Kroger 3 months before her coffee goes on their shelf. And she's kind of paralyzed, how do I do that? And I think that there's a disservice in public discourse about passing on cost to customers because she doesn't know what the tariff's going to be. She doesn't know how much it's going to cost to actually get that coffee from the port when it comes into the United States. And she's got to tell Kroger exactly how to price that 3 months prior to getting shipment. And so this mischaracterization of flipping a switch and just passing on costs to customers isn't accurate. I think it's a disservice. It's especially a disservice to the manufacturers who are kind of caught in the middle. They are not direct to consumer businesses. Their clients are large businesses. And those large businesses certainly don't want to raise costs. And their supplies the manufacturer supplies are going up. So they get squeezed at both ends. They're being told by their huge customer, you got to cut costs. And then their steel prices are going up, even domestic steel. I mean, I heard from one of our manufacturers in Minnesota, she's experiencing a 10 to 14% hike in the cost of steel. She does sheet metal fabrication that is domestic sourced. And so that price hike, she's got to absorb it. She can't pass it on to some of her large manufacturer clients. So I think there's a little bit of a disservice about how we talk about tariffs. From an interest rate perspective, we see some anxiety, although people who are getting to understand One Big Beautiful Bill Act are starting to figure out that this legislation, even though it's called a tax bill, actually it's an access to capital bill. Mm-hmm. This is actually the answer to small businesses' desire for access to capital. So instead of relying on the Federal Reserve to set rates and going to a bank, they can free up that capital by using the provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so seeing that kind of light bulb go on amongst tax advisors and their small business clients is really satisfying. And I think that that the more knowledge that happens, the greater certainty small businesses will have that they'll be able to kind of pivot using the new provisions in the tax law to overcome high interest rates. And even if there's an interest rate cut, I mean, we're not going back to 6, 7 years ago. These interest rates are going to stay high for a while.
I wish we would, but yes, I agree with you there. It'd be wonderful to go back to those rates. I was talking with somebody the other day, and I was thinking about when I bought my first house in the early 2000s, and I was so excited to get 7%. And now we're all complaining, oh my gosh, mortgage rates are so high now. But it's always about perspective, right?
It is, indeed, yes.
Yeah. Well, going forward, I would love for you to share with our audience where they can go to find out more about what you're doing at the Chamber and how they can get involved with you.
Well, thank you. I would point not only your podcast listeners, but anyone to our small business digital platform. It's called CO, that's CO. It can be found by growwithco.com or just Googling CO small business. And we provide tools, tips, information, contact information, and hopefully useful information available for small business. This is something we started during COVID because of that enormous thirst for resources and information. And we've doubled down on it, knowing that small businesses needs our help in trying to solve some challenges going forward.
Growwithco.com. I love it.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in finding out some information from the U.S. Chamber, you can go to growwithco.com. Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters. We're America's small business megaphone, and I appreciate the additional information and adding to that megaphone and reaching our small business owners. Thank you all for taking the time to tune in to Main Street Matters. It is part of the Salem Podcast Network, and new episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.